Stravinsky's ballet, The Rite of Spring, subtitled Pictures of a Pagan Russia, is one of the most seminal and groundbreaking orchestral works of the 20th century. The music is energetic, dynamic, edgy, even savage, but at the same time seductive, vivid, and compelling. The music is so fresh it feels as if it was written yesterday, but in fact it exploded onto the scene 100 years ago. And it is no exaggeration to say that for composers and performers, the world has not been the same since. The echoes of the Rite of Spring are around us everywhere today. It is hard to imagine a 20th century film score by John Williams or Bernard Herrmann without the music of Stravinsky that they borrowed from quite freely. Even rock and roll bands like Frank Zappa or Black Sabbath, Metallica, were heavily influenced by this work. This piece would influence composers from Copland to Strauss. In fact, nearly every composer in the 20th century owes something to the Rite. This piece is quite simply one of the fundamental building blocks of all kinds of 20th century music. The 1913 world premiere by Diaghilev's Ballet Russe at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées caused one of the most notorious scandals in music history. Stravinsky's revolutionary and highly dissonant music, coupled with Nijinsky's anarchistic choreography and designers Nicholas Rorich's pagan landscapes and costumes, completely caught the audience off guard, and it created a furor in the audience. No one had heard music like it before. It seemed to violate all the most hallowed concepts of beauty, harmony, tone, and expression. It was savage, aggressive, and apparently chaotic.
I think the Rite of Spring is very challenging because it's the first note. You have to play all by yourself. There are no other people playing. You have to play, play, play.
By the time the opening introduction of Spring Awakening and the plaintive sound of the solo bassoon's Lithuanian melody is transformed into the heavily accented and pulsating rhythms of the adolescent's dance, the audience was hissing and booing. This was probably due as much to the radical choreography as Stravinsky's music. The storyline portrays a primitive set of rituals, and Nijinsky did not soft pedal anything. The dancers trembled, shook, shivered, and stamped. They jumped crudely and ferociously, circling and writhing around the stage in the manner of an ancient Russian folk dance. Yet despite the chaos that surrounded the premiere, subsequent performances sold out and were met with audiences screaming with applause and delight. This Rite cemented the young composer's international reputation, the fame of the young choreographer, and the work's influential place in history. Pulse, or rhythm. Along with melody and harmony, pulse is one of the defining characteristics of music.
This is my first time playing Rite of Spring. I predict I'm going to have to really count pretty hard.
Heart throbbing, mind-bending experience. It's very rough, very intense.
Pulse is how sound intersects with time. In order to make sense of a piece of music, we need a steady beat, or at the very least, a reference point. Since the beginning of Western music, composers have played with this sense of pulse, whether speeding it up or slowing down. In fact, sometimes it was stretched or elongated.
We come to anticipate what's going to happen next. In this piece, you can never anticipate what's happening next.
This spring I'm playing the piccolo trumpet part. It's in the key of D. It's fairly technical.
There's a lot of hard, tricky harmonics and special effects for the violas that aren't in any other pieces.
Most conductors and most orchestras considered the work unperformable.
The notes aren't that hard. It's where you put the notes is hard.
Personally, I'm spending probably an hour and a half every day practicing it.
A lot of rhythms, a lot of changing rhythms. It's very intricate in that way, and that's what makes this piece different than other pieces.
In the Rite of Spring, Stravinsky goes to the extreme. Perhaps for nearly the first time in musical history, rhythm plays the major role in the musical discourse, sweeping away all the harmonic and melodic elements. Where rhythm had once been subordinate to other elements of musical composition, in the Rite of Spring, it is now the primary element. While the Rite of Spring may not have been the first work in which rhythm was a structural factor, it was the first work in hundreds of years that used it on a large scale. For example, in the very first dance section, a complex, vigorous chord is insistently repeated with violent, asymmetrical accents. This aggregate chord is created by combining two harmonious keys, E flat and F flat, which when played simultaneously creates immense dissonance and erases all sense of melody or harmony. This chord is repeated hundreds of times. In fact, it was the insistent hammering of this chord that was Stravinsky's original inspiration for the Rite of Spring. Later, there are passages where Stravinsky systematically obliterates any sense of a steady beat, replacing it with an irregular pulse that lurches along unpredictably. The music still has a rhythmic groove, but it's not like any one that's been written before. Structurally, the first part of the ballet is devoted to a series of rituals depicting the arrival of spring. The second part of the piece describes the selection of one young girl as the chosen one, leading ultimately to the notorious sacrificial dance that ends the piece. As the final ritual in the celebration of spring, the maiden dances herself to death. As you might imagine, there is nothing calm about this final scene, which remains some of the most rhythmically complex music ever written. What is fascinating about the Rite of Spring is rather than choosing a contemporary context as Stravinsky searches for his modern musical voice, he and Roerich chose to remove the ballet from as far from the present day as possible, making the setting a prehistoric tale that is both terrifying and barbaric, yet somehow was to foreshadow the horrors of the First World War that was just months away. But that's one of the great breakthroughs of the Rite of Spring. It's some of the first music ever written that strives to be real rather than pretty, and in its realness, it retains its impact that is every bit as forceful today as it was 100 years ago.